Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 9. So today's lesson is on chord progressions. So what is a chord progression and how are chord progressions used? Well, I will define a chord progression as 2 or more chords played sequentially. And that's my basic definition of a chord progression, is 2 or more chords and the chords are played in order. How are chord progressions used? Well, chord progressions are put together to make songs, and various chord progressions will be used for various sections of songs, such as the verse or the chorus, a bridge, etc. And basically songwriters take these chord progressions and they put them together in a way that gives them a sound that they want, makes a musical statement that they want to convey. And there are many chord progressions that can be played. The good thing about chord progressions is over time, songwriters and musicians have discovered that when playing in our particular key, certain chords seem to work well together. So today we're going to look at some of these chord progressions. And as you can see, I have a C major scale written on the whiteboard. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Hopefully you are familiar with this scale by now and you probably recognize it instantly if you've been following these lessons. But for those who may not have been following the lessons, this is a C major scale. And I have the notes of the scale numbered. And I also have written in indications of the scale tone chords to show which chords are major or minor. So one other thing I do want to mention is that the numbers feature prominently in chord progressions. And from the beginning, we've established that numbers could be used to represent different things. And throughout the various lessons, we have used the numbers. So we will be using numbers today. And as I said, chord progressions feature prominently, and they are generally identified by numbers. The first chord progression we're going to look at is the 4-1 chord progression. So in the key of C, the 4 chord is the F major chord, and the 1 chord is the C major chord. So this chord progression, let me just grab my guitar here, just to give us a quick demonstration of the sound of this chord progression. The chord progression starts with the F major chord, and then we have the C major chord. Now, this cadence is often referred to as the Amen cadence. And if you've ever gone to church, you've probably heard this cadence used. So if I just sort of strum these chords in a demonstration, what we get is something like this. Amen. Now, hopefully that demonstrates the sound of the cadence. So the feature of this chord progression is that we start off with the 4 chord, and then it brings us sort of back to where we start a song with the 1 chord. And there's another 2-note chord progression I want us to look at, and that progression is the 5-1 chord progression. So in the key of C major, which is what we're working with, the 5 chord is the G. major chord. And the 1 chord is the C major chord. So I just want you to give sort of a listen to these 2 chords together. We start with the G chord, and then we finish with the C chord. So when I hear the 5 chord, in this case the G, followed by the 1 chord, which in this case is the C, it sort of sounds like an ending. And I think the cadences are, or at least these cadences that we're looking at, are sort of meant to imply sort of an ending. I just want to, as an aside, state that these 2 chords could be played in the reverse order. I could start with a C, and then I could go to a G. Same thing with the 1-4 chord progression. I could start with the 1, which is the C, and then I could go to the 4 chord, which is the F. So these are examples of chord progressions that use 2 chords. So the next type of progression I would like to look at is chord progressions that have 3 chords. And the first progression I want to look at is what's known as the 1, 4, 5. The 1 chord is the C major chord, and the 4 chord is the F major chord, and the 5 chord is the G major chord. And as you can see here, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord are all major chords. And I have them circled as the primary chords in the key of C major. And you may have recalled me saying that these chords feature prominently in music that's written in the key of C major. But anyway, let's just listen to what it sounds like. We start with our 1 chord, which is the C, and then we have our 4 chord, which is the F, and we have our 5 chord, which is the G. And these three chords work so well together that songs have been written just using these 3 chords. So if I were to take this same progression and add a little rhythm to it, la la bamba, la la ba, la 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 bamba, la 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 bamba. So I hope you get the gist of this. So that is the 1-4-5 progression. And the beautiful thing about this progression, and I think it's lending to the fact that we have the 1, the 4, and the 5, the primary chords, and they're all major. The beautiful thing about this is we can take these 3 chords and we can rearrange them in different ways. So for example, if I wanted to, I could say play 4, 5, 1. So if I start with 4, that gives me F major, and I go to 5, that gives me G major, and 1 will be C major. So now when I put the 3 chords together, I get F, I get G, and then I get 1. So as you can hear, the 3 chords still sound very good together. Another type of chord progression I want to look at that has 3 chords in it is known as the 2-5-1. Now the 2-5-1 is different from the other progressions that we've been playing. So far, all the progressions that we've played have only had the 1, 4, and 5, the primary chords, which are all major chords. However, when we start to fill in the chords that we need for this progression, starting with the 2, the chord is D minor. So now we have a minor chord in our progression. And we have the 5 chord, which is the G, and the 1 chord, which is the C. So when I play these 3 chords together, I get D minor, G, and C major. Now this progression is not one that's really made to have the notes or the chords order changed around. I see the 2-5-1 as a standalone progression, and I'd like you to practice this. So that's the 2-5-1 chord progression. So those are a couple of examples of chord progressions using 3 chords. So now that brings us to chord progressions that use 4 chords. And progressions with 4 chords in them tend to give us more complete statements. And the first thing I want to just kind of show you is that if I were to take the 1, the 4, and the 5, and then put 1 after the 5, now I have a sequence of 4 chords. So now we have our 1 is C major, our 4 is F major, our 5 is G major, and then we return to the C major chord. So if I play through these chords, we start with C major, we go to F major, we go to G major, and then we return to 1. So that's often how people will take the 1-4-5 and add the 1 chord to resolve the progression to the 1. So let's look at a couple of other chord progressions that have 4 chords. And when we use progressions that have 4 chords, now songs that may be more recognizable start to come to mind. So the first one I want to show is the 1, 6, 4, 5. So we have the 1, which is C major. We have the 6, which is A minor, and that's one we haven't used in the other progressions. We have the 4, which is the F major, and we have the 5, which is the G major. So now, let's just give a listen to these chords. If I have C, then I have A minor, and I have F, which is the 4 chord, and then I have G, which is the 5 chord. So that's the 1, 6, 4, 5, and it's actually used in a lot of songs. It's a popular progression. And when you hear about songs that you can play with 4 chords, these are the kinds of things that we're getting into here. So that's the 1, 6, 4, 5. The next one I want to look at is the 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. So let's go ahead and fill in our chords. We have the 1, which is the C major. We have the 5, which is G major. The 6, which is A minor. And then the 4, which is F major. So when we put these 4 chords together, we get something like this. We have C, G, A minor, and then we have F. And if you put a little melody into it and a little imagination, it may become more familiar. Can you feel the love tonight? Now my singing isn't great, but hopefully it's good enough for demonstration purposes to sort of show you what happens when you start to combine these chord progressions with melody. And even in the simple way that I'm playing them, once you start to add melody, you start to hear something that sounds familiar. So that is the 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. So moving on, the next progression I want to look at is the 1, 3, 4, 5 progression. Now this one may not be as popular as some of the other ones, but I think it's kind of good to use various scale tone chords to sort of demonstrate the different chord progressions. We don't want to get caught up in just only using 3 chords. So let's go ahead and fill in our chords. In the key of C major, the 1 chord is C major. So now we have the 3 chord, which is E minor, the 4 chord, which is F major, and the 5 chord, which is G major. So when we play these 4 chords together, we get C major, E minor, F major, and G major. So a little bit of a variation in there, but as you can hear, the 4 chords work quite well together. So that is the 1, 3, 4, 5 progression. Moving along, the next progression I want to look at is the 1, 4, 1, 5 progression. So let's go ahead and fill in our chords. The 1 chord is C major. The 4 chord is F major. Then we return to the 1 chord, which is C major, and we finish it with the 5 chord, which is the G major. So now when I play these 4 chords together, we have the C major, F major, C major, G major. Now maybe that might have sounded familiar to you. There's an old song called Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison that uses this chord progression. So this is the 1, 4, 1, 5. And I'm not going to go through all the chord progressions. There are many, many, many chord progressions, far more than what we're going to get into today. But I want to look at one more chord progression, just for some variety. And that is the 1, 4, 2, 5 chord progression. So we're in the key of C major. Our 1 chord is C major. Our 4 chord is F major. Our 2 chord is D minor. And our 5 chord is G major. So let me play through these 4 chords so you can hear how they sound together. We start with the C major, then we go on to the F major, the 4 chord. We go to the D minor, the 2 chord, and then we finish it up with the G major chord, the 5 chord. So now you've heard how those chords work together. And keep in mind, I am just playing very simply simplified versions of these chord progressions, just so that you can hear what the chords sound like. It may not sound like songs that you are familiar with. However, I assure you, if you add some rhythm and melody to these songs, and also there are other voicings for these chords that we're using. So sometimes if these chords are played with other voicings, they begin to sound more familiar. So that's pretty much it. That's the basic fundamental information of the lesson. The main thing that I wanted you to learn is I wanted you to learn what a chord progression is, and I defined it as 2 or more chords used sequentially. And I wanted to sort of show you various chord progressions that have been used many times in the past in songs. So as far as practicing, I do want you to work with this stuff. The whole purpose of this lesson was not just to put some stuff on a whiteboard and sort of play some chords so you could hear them. The idea here is we want to practice these because these chord changes, if you will, are used often in music. So it's a very good practice for you to work on playing through these chord progressions. And as a matter of fact, if you were to practice chord progressions daily, after a while, not only would you get good at changing between the chords, you would start to hear what the progression sounds like. And that's all part of developing an ear. So for those of you who may want to get into songwriting, it's nice to have sort of a vocabulary of chord progressions that you can sort of mess around with and come up with ideas for various parts of your songs. Chord progressions can be transposed. So what do I mean by to transpose a chord progression? What I mean is, in this case, is to apply a chord progression to another key. So, not to confuse you, but let me just give you a simple example of this. So I'm just going to take this out, and we're going to go from the key of C major to the key of D major. So I'm just going to write in my D major scale. So I just want to give you a quick example by using the 1, 4, 5 chord progression. So now we are working with scale tone chords in the key of D major. So now when we apply the numbers, the 1 chord becomes D major. The 4 chord is now G major, and the 5 chord is now A major. So now when I go to play this progression in a different key, we have D major, G major, and A major. So the progression is the same. The relationship between the chords is the same. The difference is we're playing in another key. So that's what I wanted to sort of point out to you. And when you're doing your homework, I invite you to start with the key of C. Write out your C major scale, number your notes, identify your chords as being major or minor, and then start to apply your chord progressions to the scale tone chords in the key of C major. But once we've worked on that, I invite you to take that into other keys. So put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you there. Peace.